Hey guys, how's it going? Compliments of the season. Hope you all had an amazing Christmas celebration. Um, it's been a very interesting couple of days. Uh, I was telling someone I think this is the first year in a long time that I got the most gifts for Christmas this year. So for everyone that made my Christmas really special, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Yeah, super excited to be doing today's episodes. For everyone that is joining in and listening to me rant and chat about different interesting things. Thank you. Great to have you here. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about fear. Um, I think one of the most interesting things you would find people, especially at this time of the year, is a lot of people are planning and making New Year resolutions, and everybody is writing very ambitious goals and ambitious plans for all of the things they would like to achieve in the new year. But what I found to be really interesting is how um, a lot of the things we are afraid of is a function of our environment or where we grew up in. I was having a conversation with a friend and I said, there's a popular part in if you grow up like in Warri or in a part of Nigeria, you probably grew around water, right? So there's a popular saying that kids in the region are better thrown in the river, and the goal is for them to figure out how to swim by themselves, literally. So it's sink or swim, you know. And eventually, everybody that grew up in that kind of environment literally knows how to swim, you know. Or if you grow up in possibly like in a water zone, you get, even though it is very uncomfortable, you get used to the sound of gun, and it no longer becomes the way you respond when you hear a gunshot is very different from someone who has never experienced that essentially. And again, where all of this ranting is going essentially is how our environment shapes us in very interesting ways and even sometimes help shapes the things we become afraid of, you know. And that permits even some of our personal ambitions and dreams and aspiration, you know. Um, Somebody will also say that again, if you are living abroad, if you're not living in Nigeria, for context as well, the things that you would be praying for is very different. You know, you're not praying for your enemies, you're probably not praying for Johnny Messis, you're not praying for a couple of things that someone else that grew up in a very different context is praying for, or you're not bothering about certain things that someone else is bothering about. If you're probably in Nigeria, for context as well, today, if you're probably thinking of traveling on the road, you would most likely be praying and for Johnny Messes and hoping that you get to your destination safely. That is very different from what someone else that grew up in a society that is relatively a lot more safer, a lot more saner would be praying for, if they're even praying at all, you know. Um, and again, even like in business and a lot of the aspirations we have, I find that a lot of that still goes back to a lot of our environment and how it conditions us to either be comfortable with certain behaviors or to become worried or fearful of certain behaviors or ideologies because again it doesn't exist for someone else, you know. So I think my big thinking today is, as you start thinking about 2025, what are you afraid of unconsciously? What are you intentionally changing, or how are you adapting some of your dreams unintentionally? Because a lot of the time we don't even think about these things deeply. But how are you shaping what you do or who you are or what you want to accomplish based on the realities of your environment and your fears? You know. Um, is that shaping you? Is it, I view being in an environment that allows you to become bold enough to go after everything you would want because there isn't so much fear? Or are you in an environment that is conditioning you to go after things in a certain way because of, again, the fear of failure, and the cost of failure is very, very expensive, you know? I remember I had a very interesting conversation with a good friend of mine a few years ago, and she told me, said, Francis, do you know that what we do as Nigerians, or in Nigeria, in the context in Nigeria, is not normal? And what she was talking about was the context of everybody having a side hustle. And I had to pause to really think about it. The reason why a lot of people have side hustles is because there isn't really any social safety net, right? If you were to lose your job or anything is to happen to you, the likelihood of you being able to bounce back and take care and be okay financially is not there for a lot of people. So what that means is that you're probably a lot, for a lot of people, they are um, losing their job could mean significant financial damage or financial ruin for them. Right? There's no social safety net. There is no government system that kind of protects you, that ensures that even if you lose your job, the basics are still available to you. And so because of that, you are always trying to put things in place to kind of protect yourself, because again, there's that fear, there's that worry. What if something goes wrong? What if something goes wrong? And that stretches you thin in a way that you probably are not even thinking about, you know. And it's the same thing for businesses, right? I've seen um, entrepreneurs, even in the startup ecosystem or in the startup world, everybody, there is this thing that is almost very weird when founders fail. That is like, oh, they failed. But again, if you read the statistics about what startups should be, technically, is that over 90% of those businesses are expected to fail. So if the stats is that 90% of startups are expected to fail, then is failing not supposed to be part of the process? Why do we look at failure with that context? Don't we see failure as a learning opportunity? And it made me start thinking a little bit more, even deeply, about even as kids, growing up, it wasn't perceived to be okay to fail growing up. In fact, not even just failing, it wasn't even perceived to be okay for you not to be the one carrying first, second, or third in class. If you went back home and you told your parents that you came second or you came third, the parents will ask you, what about first? The person that took first, does the person have two heads? Does the person have three heads? And I think growing up, that unintentionally has conditioned a lot of us. Again, if you grew up in that kind of environment, to see failing or not being the very best as a bad thing. Again, it's fundamentally great to strive to be the best at every point in time. Um, but again, if it is from a competitive environment, then everybody can be number one, right? But even beyond being number one or not, I think more importantly, when I think about it, is what how do we approach every single time, even like for people that have kids or in your own life, how do you approach when things don't go the way you expect them to? Right? Obviously, it would be great if things always goes our way 100% of the time, but the reality is that usually doesn't happen every single time, right? So, how do we perceive things not going right? How do we perceive when things go wrong? How do we perceive when in school the outcomes we anticipate do not go our way? How do we navigate and walk through that journey and that process? You know, I find that to be something really interesting, right? Again, that if you think about how do we deal with failure or not achieving the goals that we set out to achieve. So even in your professional life, whether it's in business, whether it's in your finances, how have we kind of created a society where making mistakes doesn't seem to be okay, and people are not comfortable making mistakes. And I think it even goes in eventually even to the workplace, where because that has become a cultural way of upbringing, we are in that position where a lot of people in the workplace do not are afraid to make mistakes, are afraid to try things, right? And so, if you, for one, again, if you're a business owner, you have to be very intentional about how do you make people comfortable trying things and experimenting and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, right? Um, Again, my philosophy is that yes, it's okay that I'm not, I am also, I potentially make mistakes as well every single day, but I think the key is what are we learning from those mistakes and how do we ensure that we are not repeating the same mistakes we made previously, right? Um, Thank you, Toby. That is actually very interesting. So it's great to expect that things will be tough at the beginning. But do we really do we actually plan for that though? I'm very, very curious because I feel like a lot of the time when we are doing all of the planning, we even though we know it probably will be tough, but we never really plan with that in mind that it will probably be tough, that it will be challenging, that a lot of the things we expect will not go the way we expect it to be. I remember a few weeks ago, I was having a retreat with the team at my business. And at the beginning of 2024, we had very, very interesting ideas of some of the things we wanted to do. And like I mentioned last week, a few months in, we were literally at the point where it felt like the business was like, yeah, maybe we're going to be packing this up. I was stressed out. And eventually, coming towards the end of the year, what we finally figured out was it wasn't really even the product or how we expected the product to go that was the direction that it came through. Um, and we are way much more stable, way much more better. We've broken even. Um, and in a couple of months, we are going to be extremely profitable. And what I was, for me, again, just reflecting back was that a lot of the time, even when a lot of us are doing like our personal planning and we plan for it all to happen like in a straight line, like, hey, looking at the end, everything has worked beautifully well. We assume that yes, it might be challenging, but we never really prepare ourselves for how challenging it could be, or possibly that again, if the goal, if we, what we care about is the goal, then the approach to the goal, we should be open to being flexible in terms of how we approach the goal. You know, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I and the team have kind of changed in terms of how I'm approaching the new year. And so for me now, again, it fundamentally is what is the big picture? What is the goal? The process and the method to get into that goal can be very different. There's a great book I've been reading the last couple of days. It's called Team of Teams. A mentor recommended it. Great book, actually. Um, and again, it's a very interesting book because it's talking about war, and it was talking about how the U.S. war, the U.S. Army, the U.S. war against Afghanistan. I think it's Afghan or Iran. Sorry, I'm mistaken. But the um, um, the ISIS fighting with ISIS agents and all of that. And I think he was saying something about sorry, Al Qaeda. What do I say? ISIS fighting with Al Qaeda, and he was saying that even though the American team had best weapon, extremely trained workforce, and everything, the one thing that was very different in the American team were losing the war for the longest time, and it was because information was siloed, um, and they were fighting in a territory they didn't understand the terrain. But most importantly, the US team had like if you look like even like most American movies, you'll see that there is a plan of attack, right? There's a clear approach, and any deviation from that plan is always will cause like very strategic damage in terms of how they approach that the enemy or the war front that they're going. But when they were dealing with Al-Qaeda, one of the things they realized was Al-Qaeda they were not skilled or trained workforce. But the one interesting thing they studied about these guys was that they were very, irrespective of however they achieved that goal, they were going to get to the goal, right? So again, it's a very interesting example and analogy to use, but it was like you'll find that the suicide bombers, no matter what was the challenge in getting there, they were going to get to their target, right? And if the person was changing their mind, there was somebody else with a trigger. I was like, huh. Again, it was all about what was the outcome, right? And no matter what was the obstacle, they were going to keep navigating and navigating and navigating until they achieved that outcome. The outcome was non-negotiable, but the methods to achieving the outcome was always on the table. That was flexible and open to change. So again, as you start thinking about the new year in a couple of days, 2 3 more days, we'll be all screaming Happy New Year. We'll be all welcoming ourselves into the new year. The question or the thing I want to think about is one, is the goal you are setting for 2025 based on truly things that you are excited about, or are they things that are maybe even set because of fear? Are you chasing certain goals because of fear? Are you chasing certain goals because of the environment? How is the environment you're operating in impacting the goals you're setting for yourself? How is fear shaped as how has fear shaped you as an individual? It's never a really, I think it's something that to kind of pause and reflect a little bit, because whether we all like it or not, there are different things that we are all, maybe not, again, if you don't want to call it fear directly, but maybe things that we are all indirectly worried about, right? And are you thinking about the impact of what the outcome is? Are you focusing on the outcome, or are you married to the approach to achieving that outcome? And for me, one of the biggest thing is I am very much very married to the outcome, but the approach in getting to that outcome, I'm completely comfortable changing that. And for a lot of people, it takes a little bit getting used to. And I think that's one of the biggest advantage building or working in a startup gives you, right? It is becoming comfortable with an uncomfortable environment. A lot of people uh, like environments that are comfortable, that are structured, that are streamlined. But getting to a place where you are comfortable with being uncomfortable, where everything is changing, you know. And I tell the team, I say, hey, we are allowed to change our mind. So if we sit today and we talk about this is the approach, this is the strategy, this is what we are going to do. If 2 days later, 3 days later, we have new information, new data sets, new data points, we are allowed to revisit what we talked about a week ago and change that and change our mind. You know, there's something we were doing a few days ago, and now that we are scaling up really quickly, we're like, hey, oh, we needed to actually go and raise additional resource to actually be able to support that growth. And then we spoke to a mentor, and he was like, oh, why are you guys going that pathway? And I was like, it was a very new money. And I called my co-founder and I was like, what do you think about this? And 30 minutes later, we've changed our mind, we've adjusted what our strategy looks like, and we've communicated it to the team. But again, it takes a little bit of even getting people comfortable there. Again, for people to start even trusting that it all makes sense, you know. So again, it started off from that point where a lot of people are very uncomfortable changing, because again, it's a lot of change. We've made ridiculous amount of change this year, and what I'm really grateful for today is earning the trust of the team, knowing that it is all towards the goal. Again, and also being able to question that as well. And again, it goes back to that fear. And I also realized this even in businesses, right? Most employees or do not feel comfortable enough airing their voices, airing their opinion. And I've found that even as leaders, if you are a team lead, you are an entrepreneur, you have to intentionally get your team to a place where they can be open and honest about what they think about the goal, the approach, the strategy. A lot of businesses are not getting that value from the people that work in the business. And this is not just people that are senior in the business, every single person in the business. Because as the CEO or whatever you are, depending if you have people reporting to you, I can guarantee you there are insights and data points that they are seeing that you do not have a clue about. So again, how do you get people to a point where they can air out their opinion? And again, my philosophy is that there is no bad ideas. How do you get people to a point where they can say, "Hey, this is what I think," or "If this is what I think we should do." A lot of the time, I started off with like, "Oh, guys, this is what I'm thinking we should do," but somebody says, "Hey, I think we should go about it this way." I'm like, actually, that makes more sense. Let's go approach that. Again, if it doesn't work, it's okay, right? Going back to how do you make it comfortable for people to make mistakes? How do you make it okay for people to have an opinion? Again, like I said, if you grew up from an African environment or from an African household, the likelihood is that most of us were not also very, the households weren't, again, there are obviously exceptions to everything, right? But for most households as kids, you didn't have a voice, you didn't really have an opinion in any major strategic conversation. You were told this is what to do, and you did it. You were just you were just following. You know, you didn't have a voice. You didn't have a way to actually express an opinion or a thought around what was being implemented. But what I've seen is that at a certain point, as you keep growing your business, and even you as an individual, what would, even if you work in a corporate, what eventually stands you out, what helps you own. Again, I know there are corporates that do not allow, again, culturally, the culture of the business doesn't really allow people be able to share their own ideas and bring in their own inputs. But those kind of businesses end up struggling. They are the businesses that end up suffering for it. So if you lead a team or you are a CEO, a founder, or whatever the case is, and this is not just for team leads, because yes, that's great. You probably have team leads reporting to you, but how do you get the insight and the feedback or the input of people across your organization? Do you have a way, a methodology to actually enable people to get that information across to you? Do you actually make it okay for people to say, "Sir, I don't think that's the right way to go. I don't think we should approach it this way. How about we approach it this way?" Again, let's have conversations around it. Let's talk about it, and let's synthesize all of that insights that we are getting. Because if you're not doing that enough, then you have, we all have blind spots, obviously, but you've obviously just increased the amount of blind spots you have and the amount of insights that you're missing. So again, we start thinking about going into the new year and all of the planning. I am obviously very biased about all of the new year resolution thinking. I used to do that a lot. I still do a lot of like planning into the year, but I don't think I've really done a lot of like new year resolutions really in that sense. Um, I like to do something. I take like a proper day where I look at, hey, how have I done financially? How have I done across personally across different metrics that I try to kind of grow personally, impact, yada, yada, yada. What are some of the things I know I thought I did really well? What are the things I didn't do as much of that I would like to do a bit more of in the new year? And then maybe there are things that I also I would like to stop. So again, even in the business, we use the start, stop, continue approach, right? What are the things we want to start that we are not doing? What are the things we want to that we're already doing that we want to continue? And what are things that we are doing at the moment that it no longer makes any strategic sense that we want to stop? And interestingly, I reassess that every quarter, right? Because I think that a lot of the time, a year takes too long for you to actually wait for all of that insight. Again, for you, you can decide to do that every month, where you are like, hey, I do like a stock take at the end of every month. So it's not necessarily waiting to do a new year resolution. What are like the key projects for this new phase of my life? If I can define what those projects are, then whatever cycle works for you, whether it's on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, how am I reassessing? Okay, what do I need to start? This approach is not working. I need to change approach. I need to change strategy. but this is still the same goal. And maybe a couple of months in, the goal changes, but in an ideal case, your goals wouldn't be changing that frequently. But then again, you also want to always be keeping track of how are you approaching all of that. So that is a lot of my rant for today. We just have a few more minutes. Thank you for everyone that joined. I've seen a lot of the comments. Thank you, Toby. It was really, really good having. I'm loving seeing a few more comments dropping this time, which is great. So thank you. It's giving me a lot more of the encouragement to keep these conversations going. But yeah, before I leave today, I think the key thing I want to pause and reflect is, how is fear driving the decisions that you're making? You know, how is fear influencing some of the goals and your ambition in the, are you chasing that goal because of something you're afraid of? You know, um, if there was no limit, if nothing could go wrong, what would that goal still be the goal you'll be chasing? If you if there was no hindrance, what would that goal be? And use that. And what is that fear? What is it that you're really afraid of? And really questioning that. And how do you also help remove fear from not just from the goals, your personal goals, but even in the business? How do you make it a lot more comfortable for people not to be afraid? Not to be afraid to share their ideas with the business, not to be afraid to share their opinions, um, and not to be afraid to try things and make mistakes, but learn from it as well. How are you helping remove fear from your business? Because whether you like it or not, unintentionally, it exists. So you need to start thinking about what that looks like and how do you help dispel a lot more of that so that a lot more people become comfortable trying things, making mistakes. Are you also comfortable making mistakes? You know, do you beat yourself up every single time things don't go the way you would want them to? You know, so those are like some of the food for thoughts I would like you to have in the back of your mind. I know a lot of people are doing all of the partying, but take some time out to think about that a bit more deeply, and see what that bubbles out to. And so, hey, please send me a message. Let me know what you think. I'd like to hear your opinion about how have you dealt with fear in your own interesting ways. Um, what have been some of the biggest things you're worried of, afraid of? I'm actually also going to probably send out like a ask me anything link so that again we can build out a couple of questions ahead of each of these sessions, and hopefully makes it a lot more interactive and engaging. And yes, if you would love to actually join me on one of these live broadcasts, I'd love to have you. Um, Come join me. We'll chat. Ping me. I'll add you. Let's have. Yeah. My hope is that this is not just going to be only me having these conversations, but it will be conversations we'll be having across different things that we are all dealing with on the front line. On the front line of building our business, on the front line of leading teams across corporates and organizations, and on the front line of investing in the things that we are excited about. So, see, I see you next time, which in this case will be in 2025. Do have an amazing evening. And yeah, cheers to 2025. I'm excited to see what you'll be at, what your goals and your ambitions, aspirations are for 2025. And I hope that those aspirations, you will chase them without fear. Okay, have a good one. Cheers.